large crop carryover, lower feed demand, and relatively low prices, sub $3.50 prices, depending on the regional basis. USDA projects 168 bushels of yield. However, one of the major concerns this year, at least from our end, is that growers will likely spend less on inputs, which could also reduce yield expectations. Right? With $7 corn, it's easy to spend money on inputs and triple stack hybrids, high-end hybrids, but not so with $4 corn. So we have to see, if inputs or reduced safety margins with which growers apply inputs may also affect yield. And that is all in addition to the usual weather variables and growing condition variables. But this must be taken into account. So in light of this, we have tailored a great program for you today. I'll go over that briefly. First of all, I'll detail a little bit our reporting schedule. Then I'll get a detailed look from the fields from Randy Darr, who coordinates our 12-member crop consultant network, followed by an update on crop trading from Tom Renato. Joshua Seneschal, our in-house meteorologist, will then provide a deep dive into this year's El Nino patterns and a full ag season weather outlook. Ken, as usual, will detail our acreage and yield model, as well as our new grain crushings report. That's a brand new report that we're featuring here for the first time. Again, we feel stocks are high and feed demand is down. Grain crushing will become an important indicator. And then finally, we're looking at fertilizer inputs. Therefore, David with NPK FAS, Fertilizer Advisory Services, will detail fertilizer price movements. Importantly, we have established a new partnership with Global View. In a little bit, I want to hand it over to Charlie Troger, who will provide more exciting detail on this partnership. At the end of this webinar, he will also provide an overview of the data display on their platform. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is some good pictures of our core technical team. I think I've mentioned almost everybody except Jonathan Fleck, who is our statistician. His role will come in later in the webinar series, subsequent webinars, when we get more and more into the actual yield modeling. So speaking of our partnership, I'm handing it over now to Charlie Troger, who will detail a little bit our cooperation here. Charlie?
Yes, thanks, Stefan. Again, this is Charlie Troger. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm with Global View Software. And at Global View, we're excited to bring the Genscape LandViewer data to both our agriculture and energy customers. Each of our clients manages business risk with a variety of data inputs. And during the corn growing season, the ability to stay on top of changing crop conditions in real time and ahead of official USDA estimates will be invaluable. And I'll go through some examples that Stefan said later on. Back to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Charlie. Just want to mention that for our existing clients that have been with us many, many years, large ethanol plants, friends and family ethanol plants in our group, the program will absolutely stay the same. We provide customized reports, customized scouting, and individual calls to them. Next slide. A little bit of a bragging slide. It's a quick look at last year's performance. As you can see on the red line, that is our performance against the yellow line, that's USDA. We early on in the season saw the larger crop yields we ultimately got when USDA was still low. But at the end of the season, we did not subscribe to the excessively high predictions made by other outfits of corn yields in excess of 178 bushels per acre. As you can see, the market agreed with us as prices during that time moved up for corn when the market realized that 178 bushels per acre were not going to be realized. And with that, last week's performance brings us to this year's schedule. Next slide, please. Here's the schedule. We have our weekly crop consultants report, which allows us to front-run the USDA crop progress report every week. You should have received the first crop consultants report over the weekend. either sent you by email or uploaded into the GlobalView platform. Towards the end of June, we provide our satellite-based acreage assessment prior to the USDA acreage announcement. This is an important webinar. Starting with this day, we will also provide our first yield assessment, which then will be updated every 2 weeks. And then during the yield assessment, you know, our statistician will provide substantial input for that, Jonathan. This information will also be communicated to you with webinars throughout the season. Our first one is today. The next webinar is tentatively scheduled for June 9. Another key webinar is scheduled for the end of June. Remember when the big important acreage number is released by USDA. The third webinar will be held early August, right before USDA releases their first yield prediction. And then we'll have additional webinars throughout the fall, monitoring the fall harvest. With that, I turn it over to Randy Darr for our updates from the current planting season and crop progress. Randy?
Thanks, Stefan. Yes, this is Randy Darr of Soilright Consulting Services in Shipman, Illinois. We're an independent agronomic consulting company, started in 1986, and we work on roughly 80,000 acres scattered throughout Illinois, Missouri, and Wisconsin. I've also, I guess this is our 4th year with the Genscape LandViewer project of coordinating our consultant network across the Corn Belt. I think is one of the unique things of the LandViewer system that we actually have ground truth mechanism built into the system that gives a very good overview of what the corn crop looks like throughout the Corn Belt. As you can, if you're on the slide with the map on it, Stefan, you can see these are our current numbers of percentages of how much of the corn crop is planted currently. It looks very favorable that, and one of the unique things that I've noticed that approximately, say, 60 to 70% of this crop is all about the same age. It was all put in about the same 2-week period, and it is really right now is just getting ready to explode. So there's been adequate to an abundance of rain over the Corn Belt the last 10 days. Southern regions a little more than they should have received, or a little more than they needed. Other areas it was just right. So moisture issues are not a concern at this time. We do need some warmer weather to help the crop get on its way, but right now it's just sitting there waiting to really take off, and it has tremendous prospects. I guess next slide, Stefan. You'll notice here we have an example of some of the reports that come in from our consultant network. Our consultant network is apprised of 12 different independent companies, so there could be, it's not just 12 individuals, it's 12 individual companies, so there might be other individuals inside that company that also provides information. For my own company, there's 7 of us, so I get information from each one and kind of make up my report each week. So in reality, there could be as many as 40 to 50 people in this making these crop assessments. Here you'll see Bruce Nolan's in Minnesota, and give you a minute there to look that over. We try to give kind of a snapshot in time report on what the crop looks like, moisture levels, even make some blurbs about soybeans because I know many of you are interested in that also. We try to give fertilizer movement talks or relate what we've seen in fertilizer movement. Like currently today, all the fertilizers been put on, nitrogen's applied. There is some side dress nitrogen applications going on in southern regions of the Corn Belt right now, and that will continue on for the next month. So you go on to South Dakota, report there. They're a little chilly, but they're progressing along nicely. And then there's southern Iowa, very nice report there. The corn is going well, and from there those are just examples of our reporting system. So, Stefan?
Good, thanks, Randy. So again, Randy coordinates the weekly report, much more detailed in the weekly report that we send out over the weekend. So now I'm seeing if Tom Renato has been able to dial in. Tom, are you there?
Yes,
Tom?
can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, you want to give us an overview from the trading desk, what's going on in corn trading, soy trading?
Yes, it's a little brief background about myself. I've been trading for 35 years. In the last 9 years, I've been doing consulting work for Foundation in California. So my viewpoint of the markets is more longer term. I don't take short-term positions. I take positions that can last 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months, a year. It's not uncommon. And I think it's going to be a challenging year for the U.S. farmer. He's going to have to decide how he's going to market some of the crop that he might be holding for the last year or two. Farm stocks are probably understated. So he's got to market those into the new crop or carry those over at some point. And then a crop that as Randy just indicated, a crop that's probably better than last year at this point. We had a lot of challenges in Northwestern Corn Belt last year with prevent plant and excessive moisture that actually hit probably cut back on the yield, the national yield, and also the overall crop production. And this year we're having, I would say, damn near ideal conditions in the Northwestern Corn Belt, which is, your heavily producing areas of Nebraska, Iowa, Southwest Minnesota. So those areas are not facing the issues that they did as they did last year. Coupled with that the world grain supplies are burdensome. We have abundant world wheat supplies, as exhibited today. The reports corn supplies. China, our major buyer, is looking every which way to cut back imports on feed grains. So there's going to be some great challenges, and probably and potentially with normal weather, we're looking at lower prices here ahead of us. It's oddly enough, we're not that far away from June. With plentiful moisture in the ground, the temperatures are not expected to be overly excessive this year. And we're going to be facing stiff competition from Ukraine and South America, and again, lack of imports from countries that would look to import stuff, particularly China. Also, wheat in general is going to cut into the U.S. corn export picture because wheat corn is pretty much at feed levels in world markets, so that's another negative to the corn arena. We've seen to this point wonderful growing conditions here and harvest conditions in South America, which is also going to weigh on the bean market. It's not clear about beans. Bird flu is an ongoing issue. While it may not cut in large numbers, or overall, it's still a negative on overall feed demand. And again, another challenge for the U.S. farmer. So I'm looking for lower prices ahead. Again, I have to assume normal conditions unless told otherwise, and would not be surprised to see a corn board trade in this 310 to 330 range. The government gave us a range today of 320 to 380 basis new crop. So you have to say that new crop is probably at the higher end of the range, assuming that the yield is going to go up and acres are going to go up. Because of conditions that are a lot better than last year. So I'm looking in that kind of range for corn, and then for beans, I'm looking in the 8.25 to 8.75 type range. Again, the markets are set up position-wise in wheat and corn that excessive, funds are heavily short, but the farmer here is still long, and that's a concern. And the world grain supply situation for right now seems plentiful.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. It was very good input. And with that, I think we're going to go into the weather outlook for the growing season. Again, I want to introduce Joshua Senechel with a Genscape meteorology practice.
Yeah, thanks.
Joshua, want to take it? Yep.
Yep, yeah, so my name's Josh Seneschal. I'm the meteorologist and forecaster over here at Genscape. And I guess we'll start off the weather outlook and talk a little bit about the El Nino expectations. So right now we do have, as many as you probably already know, we do have an El Nino in place. We're kind of in the weak to moderate El Nino status right now. And the image on the right in this slide is showing what the computer models are forecasting for sea surface temperature anomalies all the way out into next winter. And essentially, the vast majority of our computer models are telling us we're going to have a weak to moderate El Nino through the summer and into the fall months. And that is currently our expectation here at Genscape. Now, there is one model in particular that is kind of hinting at a super El Nino. I know there's been a little talk out there referring to a possible super El Nino, but the only model indicating this is the CFS model. This model has been notoriously bad in the last several months. It was actually indicating a strong El Nino last summer. Of course, that didn't verify. So we think the likelihood of a strong El Nino is very likely. Again, we only have one model really showing that as a solution. So we think the best case here is we're going to see a weak to moderate El Nino continuing through the summer months.
Excellent.
Okay, so now that we've kind of debunked the likelihood for super El Nino, what are the implications of a summertime El Nino on corn yields? Well, if you notice in the graphic on the right, in general, El Nino patterns produce the highest yields, averaging 103.6% of normal. On the contrary, La Nina patterns typically have below normal yields at 98.4% of normal. So your typical El Nino summer is favorable for corn yields. We typically see above normal yields. However, does this necessarily guarantee that we're going to see above normal yields this summer? So I guess kind of the main takeaway from the image on your right here is that since 1980, we've had 7 summertime El Nino events. And 3 out of these 7 were actually below normal yield years, where the yield came in at least a certain percentage below normal. 4 out of the 7 were above normal. So this tells us that although the odds are increased, we're going to see above average yields. We do, in fact, occasionally see below trendline yields. Of course, there have been a few El Nino years, like I mentioned, that we've seen above normal yields. 1982 and 2004 in particular, these were very strong yield years. I believe 2004 had a yield nationally around 164 bushels per acre. If you adjusted that to the present day, accounting for trendline yield growth, I think you'd be talking about 176 bushels per acre. So if we had the ideal El Nino type summer, we could see yields theoretically well over 170 bushels per acre, similar to last year, which I believe was 171. But again, we have seen at least 3 out of the last 7 El Ninos with below trendline yields. And ironically, one of those years was actually the super El Nino event of 1997. Okay, so you're probably wondering, why do we normally see such favorable growing conditions during an El Nino? Well, if you look at the image in the top right, that is looking at surface temperature anomalies averaged over all El Nino years dating back to 1950. And clearly, we typically see below normal temperatures throughout the growing season, June, July, and August. And obviously, a lack of heat is typically favorable for corn growth. Now, if you look at the image below, that is 1987, and that was actually an El Nino summer. And we actually have much above normal temperatures across pretty much the entire Corn Belt. So while the average El Nino is a cool summer, we have seen a few summers which have actually turned out considerably hotter. And another interesting thing is that summer that you're looking at, 1987, that is actually one of our top weighted analog years that we used for the summer forecast. Okay, so let's take a look at our forecast. The image on the left is our summer temperature forecast. The image on the right is NOAA's summer temperature forecast. Obviously, quite the contrast. They actually have pretty much the complete opposite of our summer outlook. But what we're expecting is above normal temperatures basically across the entire Midwest. We do have the strongest heat focused across the Southwest Midwest, including portions of southern Iowa, western Illinois, and also much of Missouri. We are expecting a hot summer with the peak intensity of the heat hitting during the month of July. The National Weather Service on the right, as you can see, a lot of gray. They're basically going for equal chances for above or below normal temperatures. It's not the same thing as normal temperatures. Basically what NOAA is telling us is that it could go either way. It could be a warm summer or it could be a cool summer, and obviously we're taking the warmer scenario. So over to precipitation. Again, the National Weather Service, their forecast is on the right, and you're going to see a lot of gray once again. They're going with equal chances for above or below normal precipitation. We, on the other hand, do favor below normal precipitation across the western Corn Belt, including some of the key production areas of Illinois and Iowa. We do favor the best rainfall across the eastern Corn Belt, especially the Ohio Valley region, and a lot of that rainfall is going to be focused in the months of June and July. So we are considerably drier than the National Weather Service across the western Midwest and considerably wetter across the eastern Midwest. And the reason why our forecasts are so different really comes down to our forecasting methodology. NOAA, or the National Weather Service, they have their own climate model that they rely heavily on. We, on the other hand, use kind of a different technique. We look to analog years to develop our forecast. So they have an actual physical climate model, but we use analog forecasting, and so far it's worked out pretty well. All right, so let's take a look at the month of June. Basically, we're expecting above normal temperatures as much as 2 to 3 degrees above normal, increasing in coverage across the Midwest. These warm anomalies will be most prominent across the western Midwest and the High Plains. We're also expecting below normal rainfall for the western Midwest, so we're going with above normal temperatures and below normal rainfall across a few of the key production regions. Farther east, we do think the temperatures are going to be a little bit closer to normal, and we're also going to have better rainfall chances focused across the Ohio Valley. Now, heading into July, we do think heat is going to intensify across the Midwest, reaching its peak. The strongest heat right now is favored across most of, pretty much all of Missouri, western Illinois, and especially southeastern Iowa. We're going for another dry month across the western Midwest, so we're going hot and dry for a second month. And we also do think that the heat is going to start to expand across the Ohio Valley region. However, we do think that we're still going to see some pretty good rainfall chances lingering into July across Indiana and Ohio. So definitely starting out the summer, more favorable growing conditions for the eastern Midwest, a little bit less than ideal across the western Midwest. Now, as we transition into August, I do think we're still going to see some above normal temperatures persisting, although I think a lot of that warmth is going to be focused on the early part of the month, and then we're going to see conditions trend cooler throughout the month of August. We also are looking at a pretty big change in precipitation. I think the western Midwest is going to see above normal rainfall. The timing of this could be critical. We're looking at 2 months of consistently dry conditions in the western Corn Belt. I am expecting that transition to wet conditions. When exactly that transition takes place, I think is going to be a pretty big factor in determining our yield potential this summer. And then I do think that, again, across the Ohio Valley, it looks like good rainfall chances pretty much all months throughout the summer. So overall, what do we expect the impacts to be? Well, already we do have some drought conditions across the upper Midwest, although it sounds like planting conditions and growing conditions are quite good in that area, but the drought monitor does indicate we do have some pockets of moderate, even some severe drought across the Dakotas and Minnesota. So starting out, we do have some drought in the upper Midwest. Based off our forecast for hot and dry conditions, I think this drought will expand southward into Iowa, also into portions of western Illinois, expanding a little bit into eastern Nebraska. That's kind of our expectation. And then August, if the rain comes when we expect, I think it's going to kind of limit how much drought we see developing. And we're also looking at occasional periods of sustained heat across the central and southern Midwest. And we're going to have to watch that as it may stress crops and potentially reduce our corn yields. So now that we're done with the summer, let's take a quick look at the fall. And in general, we're expecting a warm fall, and that should kind of mitigate the threat for or the risk of an early frost. If our warm forecast does verify, there's a good chance we have enough growing degree days already accumulated to really get that crop to maturity. So I really don't expect much of a frost threat early in the fall this year. We do think that the heaviest rainfall in the fall is going to be the western Midwest, so kind of flipping our summer precipitation forecast, that's going to be your fall precipitation forecast. So we expect more rainfall in the western Midwest. That could slow harvest activities. I do think the Ohio Valley region is going to be drier September, October, and in November. So based off that, you'd actually have better harvest conditions across the Ohio Valley region. I think we're going back over to Ken.
That's correct.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Josh. Great job. Very interesting. And I think what we're seeing here is kind of goes along with what Josh showed for the spring forecast with the soil moisture. These are both maps that we have on our webpage that are available to clients to view and overlay basis pricing and other information on. Just looking at the soil temperature, again, matches up well with what Josh is showing, that in the upper Midwest, the western half, they're still pretty low, but certainly in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, warming up enough for the crop. Soil moisture similar. There's definitely a deficit in the upper Midwest and the western half of Minnesota, but the eastern half of the Corn Belt looks quite good. So next slide, please. Here we've just looked at rainy days as a way to get an idea of how much crop could be planted, and as Randy has indicated, as the consultants have pretty much shown, we haven't had any problems this year. You can see since April 1 how dry it's been up in Minnesota. Basically only 1 or 2 days of rain. This is rain greater than 1/4 of an inch. And really most of the Corn Belt has had, you can kind of compare it to last year where it was, there were some decent number of rainfall days in, you remember, northeastern Iowa and how wet it got, Wisconsin. Quite dry this year, very good for planting. The only issues have been in the eastern half of the Corn Belt into Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So next slide. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the yield and acreage model. Obviously, we haven't run anything yet. It's a little premature, but we're going to talk about how we're going to do things this summer to kind of follow up on the success we saw last year. So next slide, please. Looking at the plantings to date, because the first product that we're going to output in late June is going to be our planting. Our planting map is really based on ground information. It's not based on surveys, so we use satellite data as a couple of our inputs. So we really don't look to put anything out until late June, just prior to USDA, and that will also be the same time that we come out with our first yield model. This is what the USDA has put out so far. I'm sure everybody's seen these charts by now. The left side has the number of corn acres planted proposed, and then the right side is actually soybeans, and you can see that USDA, based on their surveys, is expecting there to be a higher number of soybean acres, although most people thought that the number of corn acre reduction was not as significant as expected. So maybe go on to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about our methodology for developing our acreage estimate. So again, late June we'll come out with our acreage estimate. We look at, based on our analysis from previous years, we'll be looking at the amount of rainfall in May, which may impact the number of corn acres that can be put out, and also it it can often be an indicator of the number of corn acres that were drowned out, and that can be quite valuable. We saw that a couple of years ago. A feature that we use that we haven't seen a lot of other groups using is nighttime surface temperature from satellite. Now, the difference here is that weather stations measure the atmospheric temperature. These satellites actually measure the temperature of the surface. And we've just found a good relationship between corn acreage and the temperature on the ground. Usually corn acres have been worked, even if it's cutting into no-till. Usually, often corn follows soybeans. So we've just found a good relationship between the surface temperature and then the acreage that's in corn. Obviously, we look at vegetation vigor. As mid-June approaches, corn starts to show up on satellite. It usually doesn't show up on satellite really well until you start to get some canopy closure, which is occurring in mid-June, especially nowadays with the corn varieties that we have. And we do expect to see, as Randy indicated, with all the good planting that we've gotten, the uniformity and the planting times, we should get some really good results this year with the vegetation imagery. And the final thing that we do is we don't look by state. We don't do a national assessment. We break it out into ag districts, agro-eco zones, where we suspect that the climate is going to be very similar, so that we're trying to break out corn acres that are being grown in a similar climate zone. So we're not trying to measure corn acreage in North Dakota using the same parameters that we measure corn acreage in southern Missouri. So that's the methodology we use for our acreage estimates. We've gotten some pretty good results in the past. We're usually within 1 or 2% at least of what USDA is estimating. We also use some higher resolution satellite imagery. We'll use the Landsat satellites, and we also acquire some of the rapid eye imagery that's the 5-meter resolution as well to kind of zoom into particular areas. And of course, finally, there's a lot of ground truth that's involved. The crop consultants are sending in geotagged pictures of corn acreage. We go out ourselves and drive around and take a look, and nowadays with with the GPS smartphone, you can tag a lot of acreage very fast as far as the number of acres that are planted. So maybe move on to the next slide now. And here's talking a little bit about the yield model, and of course, again, this will be first ran in our late June time frame. Jonathan Flex, our statistician, he runs the model for us. We also rely on the crop consultants and the information that they're getting on the ground to help us calibrate the model. But we have 10 years worth of historical data that we use. This includes the USDA yields and the harvested acres that they've used as well. We use growing degree days, monthly precipitation, and soil moisture, of course, but we also use a number of satellite variables. And one of the things, again, that we feel like is an advantage to our satellite data is that we only look at acreage that's in soybean or corn. So we develop our corn soybean mask. We apply that mask to the acreage to only look at those acres when we're looking at our satellite data to reduce a lot of the confusion from other, forest or wheat or whatever the other ground cover may be. Now, we also use a number of satellite variables. NDVI, which a lot of people are familiar with, which is a vegetation index, daytime surface temperature, nighttime surface temperature, the fraction of photosynthetically active radiation, and then leaf area index, and we look at all of these when we're developing the yield model. And again, similar to what we've done when we're developing our acreage map, we're looking at the soil carbon in the different counties and its impact on yield, and then we're breaking out our analysis into agro-eco zones. So we're not comparing counties that are vastly different as far as their climate and their chemical makeup goes when we're doing our analysis. So maybe to the next slide then, please. What we've added this year to try to make the model a little more robust, which may actually deviate some of our numbers from USDA, is that we've done we're going to start doing a proximity analysis. An example here, if you look at that county in the middle that's in yellow, it has a yield of 146. All the counties surrounding it are in the 180s to the 160s. So it's highly unlikely that that county has that level of deviation from surrounding counties. It's probably more a situation where the number of surveys that USDA was able to get in were not really sufficient to capture an accurate number of yields in that county. You usually see this in counties where there's a lower number of acreage. Obviously, the counties that are up higher, you can see how well they respond. But one of the things we're going to do differently this year in these counties is run a robust proximity analysis that's moving around the Corn Belt, looking at the values, comparing the values county to county, and then coming up with values that are more similar from county to county. So maybe the next slide now, please. So now we're going to jump over to our grain crushing and co-products report. Next slide, please. Now this is front-running the new USDA grain crushings and co-product report that's being released. It began on February 19th. It's now released the first of each month. It is a very detailed survey of ethanol manufacturing facilities in the U.S. We at Genscape monitor ethanol plants for production. We look at their natural gas use to measure how much ethanol they're producing, and we've got about 47% of the ethanol facilities in the U.S. that we're monitoring. So we thought that might give us an indication of what type of data the USDA is going to put out. We have seen that since this data has been coming out, it has, as you would suspect, been being used in the WASDE report. So it gives some indication of potentially how it may impact the WASDE report when it comes out on the 1st. So really, we have the ability, because it looks at not the month prior to, but the month prior to that. It estimates the amount of corn that was crushed and also estimates the amount of products that were generated, including DDGS. So we actually have the ability to forecast it almost a month in advance. So next slide, please. So here's what we've seen to date. Just USDA went back to October 2014 to develop their report. So we compared the BTUs that we're seeing coming out of the ethanol plants to the number of bushels of corn that were being crushed. And as you'd suspect, with such a large percentage of the population, we're getting a very strong relationship between what we see and what USDA publishes. But again, we're seeing it almost a month in advance of what USDA releases. We're seeing the same effect with DDGS. Now, what we do with DDGS is we look at the amount of first we only focus on dry mill plants. We focus on plants that, through the literature, et cetera, we have a strong reason to believe are creating primarily dry distiller grains. Then we subtract the amount of natural gas that's required to produce ethanol and just look at what natural gas is left and make the assumption that that's being used to dry distiller grains. And again, the relationship there is quite nice. We got a very good forecast with that as well. So the next slide, please. We're going to put our necks out here a little bit and go ahead and present to you what we're expecting the report to say on June 1st. And based on ethanol pricing, this may not be a surprise for people, but we are expecting that corn consumed will be down by 9% compared to March, up slightly from February. Some of that has to do with the number of days that are in the month. And then we expect distiller grains to also be down 7% from March as well. So maybe the next slide. And now I'm going to hand it over to Stefan for information on the fertilizer report. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about fertilizer. Genscape has also, as I said earlier on, right, we're informing crop production, and then crop crushing, corn crushing, and then also inputs, right? So we have, several steps along the supply chain. Genscape releases a fertilizer report that also includes vessel tracking, all the fertilizer vessels coming into the U.S., and then a monitoring of the U.S. plants. And then through our partnership with good consulting companies here in the area of fertilizer, in this case NPK FAS, we are able to have access to prevailing retail prices. And with that, I want to see if David Asbridge is online and can detail us a little bit the retail price supply for fertilizer. David, are you there?
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, first thing I'm going to do is thank my daughter. I'm actually at the hospital now. She decided to go ahead and have the baby early, so I was able to participate in this call. So glad for that. Mother and daughter are doing fine. Talk a little bit about the fertilizer market here. We have seen a big change in the fertilizer market here in the U.S. over the last two weeks. When the Eastern Corn Belt had been under the moisture constraints that they'd been under, fertilizer was moving very slowly. There was a lot of product, particularly urea, being backed up at the Gulf Coast because there was just no demand up in the Eastern Corn Belt. Western Corn Belt, the Northern Corn Belt were doing fairly well. The Northern Corn Belt, of course, it was still cool up there, but it was dry enough. Farmers were getting work done. Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen it warm up, so they've been moving a lot of fertilizer. The western states have caught up. And now what we've seen is that the eastern half of the Corn Belt, as mentioned earlier in the weather report, now the weather has kind of turned. It has dried up. It has given the farmers an opportunity to get out there and get a lot of work done. We've actually seen some ammonia shortages, some phosphate shortages in the eastern Corn Belt because farmers got out there and were moving so quickly. It's just amazing how much fertilizer they can put down, how much planting they get done now on a short term. But what we're looking at over the next 2 to 3 weeks and all is probably just a relatively steady fertilizer market. Particularly if you're looking in the nitrogen sector. One thing to keep in mind is that if a farmer plants corn, which corn planting is now ahead of normal, so I think the USDA number of around 89 million acres is still a pretty good estimate. That's I think a good number at this point. Really no big problems now anywhere. Just they got to finish up. But what that means is that when a farmer plants corn, nitrogen has to be applied. He can cut back on his phosphate, he can cut back on his potash because those will carry over in the soil, but the nitrogen has to be applied. And so what we're looking at over the next 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks, is a relatively steady set of prices out of the retail sector as farmers, complete their pre-plant, those that haven't done it yet, and then the farmers that went ahead and got planted and now are going into the side dress situation. We do expect a fairly robust side dress season this year because we know a lot of farmers that went ahead and just worried about getting their crop planted and then decided to put their fertilizer on later. So I think though after we get through this 3 to 4 week period here, we are turning pretty bearish on fertilizer prices, and that's across the board: nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. there's just an enormous supply of fertilizers out there at the world level. We're looking at record imports of urea coming into the Gulf Coast. We're looking at high levels of UAN, liquid nitrogen, coming in. So, there's a lot of fertilizer out there, a lot of product available. And so I think once we get through this side dress season, which again, we're expecting to be fairly good, we're turning pretty bearish across the board for fertilizer products and expect to see, lows probably in the mid to late August, early September period. And then at that point, we expect to see them flatten out a little bit and then move a little higher going into the fall season, because we do anticipate a good fall, particularly if we have a big crop. They pull a lot of nutrients out of the soil, so farmers that have been drawing down particularly their P and K are going to need to come back in and put some of that down. Now, the issue, of course, is going to be crop budgets. We're looking at crop prices that are getting relatively low, and so farmers are going to have to be concerned that if fertilizer prices are too high relative to crop prices, it could cut back a little bit. But last fall, there were weather issues. We had a very poor fall season. If the weather will hold out and all, we do expect a really good fall season this year. That should make fertilizer prices tick up a little bit for a fall season, but again, probably still at or below where they are right now.
David, but for now, growers do have to contend with relatively high fertilizer input prices, right, for the next couple of weeks. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, we're still looking at prices, that are going to hold steady, because a lot of these retailers brought product in at relatively high prices before the prices began to fall off some. Particularly look at urea. There's a lot of high-priced urea here over the last couple of weeks that's been moved to the retail system, so they're not going to want to cut that price, but they are going to want to empty their inventories. So, in the next 2 or 3, 4 weeks or so, we're going to see, retailers get fairly aggressive if this product is not moving quickly enough, because they don't want to carry it over through the summer.
Yeah, and hopefully, but you pointed out, right, growers always know to put on nitrogen, but hopefully they don't shrink that safety margin, and skimping on product. Hopefully they're still applying ample nitrogen to bring the crop up.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, like I say, if a farmer plants corn, he knows he's got to put that nitrogen on. He has a little leeway, and he can cut back a little bit on application rates, but not much. They contrary to what a lot of people say, they don't put on a lot of extra nitrogen just because they can, because it costs them money. And so, they know what they need to put on, and if the weather's good and the crop's growing, it's going to use it.
Yeah. Hey, David, just say a couple of words about your background. You have a really good background.
My partner and I actually worked for a fertilizer producer. I worked for him for almost 20 years. He worked for him for almost 30 years. That was CF Industries, back when they were a co-op. They're now one of the world's largest nitrogen producers. In fact, they control about 60% of the nation's liquid nitrogen production. They've also got 2 big world-scale plants that are getting ready to come on stream now. So we've got a good history and background. In addition to that, I've also worked for the American Soybean Association as their chief economist. I worked for Doan Advisory Services, their soybean economist and business development manager. But came off a farm, got 30 plus years of experience doing this kind of stuff and all. So if you're interested in fertilizer, go to our website and take a look at our stuff.
Great. Thanks, David. Really appreciate it, and congratulations on your granddaughter.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, yeah. So let's go to the next slide then. So I went out here on the Illinois River. There is a large UAN terminal, and in March I snapped an IR image using our Genscape IR imaging capabilities that we mostly apply to oil tanks, oil storage tanks. So to the left, you can see a March 10 image. You can see that this inventory is ready for the season. Tanks are full with UAN product. And then I went out end of last week, May 7 on Friday. You can see how those UAN tanks are empty, waiting obviously to be refilled for the side dressing season. I just want to show that we are also watching inventory here sporadically. This is just a plug here for our fertilizer report. Again, we're tracking via vessel tracker all ships delivering fertilizer to the U.S. and then U.S. production of fertilizer to get a good handle on this input and price points for fertilizer. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, as the last section, I should say, of the webinar, I want to hand it back to Charlie, and he will give us an overview of the data integration of Genscape data into the Global View Market View platform.
Okay, thanks again, Stefan. You could forward to the next slide, please. Our main delivery product is Market View Desktop, which is what we're showing here, although we also support a standalone Excel-based product as well as a mobile app for both the iPhone and the Android. So on this screen, in the Market View Desktop, we do have the Genscape information is accessible in 3 different ways. I'm showing 2 here. I'll touch on 1 in a minute. On the upper left-hand side, the Genscape data going back for the historical information is available underneath a folder called Genscape, and then you can just simply choose the state and then the counties that you would like to view, and the information is there depicted on the right-hand side. For the lower right-hand corner on the Genscape PDFs, it's very simple to use. You click on our news section and type in GEN. It will pull up the Genscape information, and you can view the PDFs, which I'll show you a quick sample of that. Next slide, please. In this slide, we're actually showing our business intelligence desktop, where on the left-hand side, I've got some data pulled in from the county that I live in, Fillmore County, Nebraska, and as well as DeKalb County, Illinois, looking at the different information that's available. And on the upper right-hand chart, I'm showing the corn annual yield for my county, and you can see we had a drought in 2012, depicting the low yield, the per bushel yields, as well as the large crop in 2014. On the lower right-hand side, I'm just simply showing a difference in some monthly precipitation based on from my county and comparing it to Illinois. And of course, you can do this with any of the different data sets and slice it and dice it any way that you want. Next slide, please. This one, we have also the third method to be able to view Genscape data is the LandViewer product, which you saw earlier. And on this screen, you can integrate this right into the Market View Desktop. On the left-hand side, we are showing some precipitation to date, and I'm also comparing that on the same scale with some cash bid price information on the right-hand side, keeping track of what corn prices are locally. Next slide, please. And on the final method for viewing, we do have the PDFs that are available, as we saw earlier. Again, these will update as we get them from Genscape. One of the key things here is we do keep this information historically, so it's something you don't have to store and keep in your inbox or on a file on your computer. You can always go back and pull this information up. And the next and last slide, please. As an agricultural producer myself, I'm really looking forward to having the Genscape data available as we watch this year's corn crop develop, and I hope you are too. You can contact me at the email and phone number that's on the screen here for more information about Genscape data in the Market View products from Global View. And you can also feel free to sign up for a free trial if you're so inclined. Turn it back over to the Genscape folks. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it. Just a couple of closing thoughts here that I had going through the presentation. The pricing mask, the elevator pricing mask that Charlie showed is actually it's really good data. That data from GeoGrain gets updated once a month. It's for several thousand elevator grain buyers across the Corn Belt. It's color-coded for relatively high versus low priced corn across the Corn Belt. Please make a point to check out the pricing mask. It's a very helpful feature. Maybe on our next call, on the June 9 call, we're gonna feature that a little bit more. We didn't get to everything, but I felt we used the hour wisely here with our overview, and hope you enjoyed it. I don't see any questions here. If there's any further questions down the road, feel free to email us. And with that, I think that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for attending. Thank you. Bye-bye.